To preview tonight's vice presidential debate is Elizabeth Pipko. Elizabeth is a model, author, and a brilliant political mind. I've seen you, Elizabeth, on Fox, on the PBD podcast. I am so honored to have you moments before the debate on my show. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Well, Elizabeth, look, I know that you're a very strong supporter of Israel, so it's kind of fitting that you're on the program. As we speak, what's happening over there is just horrific. Iran has been sending missiles to Israel today, and I'm understanding there's not many casualties as of our conversation. I just wanted to get your initial reaction with what's happening in Israel.
Yeah, I mean, what's happening is obviously horrific. I'm glad you mentioned that thanks to the Iron Dome, there really was not a lot of damage done. Doesn't mean that it wasn't record-setting, the number of rockets that were actually sent into Israel today, but luckily there was not a lot of damage. There was actually a terrorist attack at a train station, unfortunately, and multiple Israelis did lose their lives, which unfortunately is also a regular thing for people in Israel. But what I want people to understand is this does affect us, right? People ask me all the time, why do Israel's problems affect me? And it's because Israel's enemies happen to also be our enemies, right? Iran chants death to America just as often as it chants death to Israel. The only thing standing in the way of Iran trying to wipe Israel off the face of the earth is that they believe that America will have Israel's back because we share a want to destroy terrorists. So the fact that this is happening, the fact that Iran is not worried about America retaliating, is a very bad look for our country and shows how weak people think that we are, how weak our enemies think that we are, how weak we have clearly portrayed ourselves to be over the last 4 years with this administration. And I just hope people remember how peaceful it was just 4 years ago and all the chaos that we've seen kind of erupt, especially in that region, but all around the world, really, in the last 4 years.
Elizabeth, I've been saying for weeks, maybe months now, that the world is on fire. And I understand that the border, certainly here in Arizona, is a big issue. I understand the economy, inflation, crime, right down the line. But I think a lot of people, the American public, we kind of just are in our little cages and we go throughout our day and we don't really think about what's happening overseas until it comes right here at home. The truth of the matter is, with what's happening in Ukraine and what's happening in Lebanon, Gaza, and Israel, and Iran, it really could hit home, because if the U.S. gets dragged into this thing, it means a lot for our tax dollars, and it means a lot really for all citizens. So I present this to you. We're going to see Tim Walz versus J.D. Vance in a debate. This is breaking news, what's happening in Israel. I understand, these people prep for months for these debates. How does J.D. Vance handle what's happening foreign policy-wise tonight?
Well, it's interesting you ask, because I think it's actually much easier for J.D. Vance to handle those questions right now than for Tim Walz, right? Because Tim Walz has to defend Kamala Harris's record of these last 4 years with Joe Biden and her at the helm and everything that's been created. J.D. Vance has to defend Donald Trump's record, which was bringing peace to the Middle East in historic agreement. So I think it's very simple for him. It's also very simple to talk about the issues happening at home because, like you said, Americans don't often think about what's going on around the world. But when you see real terrorism, like what happened in Israel on October 7th last year, that's when you realize how dangerous having an open border actually can be. So when you talk about an open border for people that might not be in a border state, that might not connect with that problem, they suddenly do, because they're seeing terrorism on their TV screens happening in the Middle East. They're realizing what these terrorist attacks look like. They're realizing what it means when you have enemies like that being allowed into your home, and what it means to have the open border that we've had for the last 4 years. So it's actually very easy for J.D. Vance to say, look at the mess that has been created. Look at how much innocent life has been taken. We need to fix our country and the entire world immediately. For Tim Walz, he has a problem, because he has to answer for an administration that has allowed all of this to happen, that has chosen to appease our enemies instead of standing strong against them. And every single thing that's happened because of that policy, that strategy, everything that they've put forward has failed. And we have left the world on fire, Americans more unhappy than really ever before in recent history, minus in the middle of the pandemic. And I think it's horrific, but also very, very difficult for Tim Walz tonight to have to justify everything this administration has done overseas and in our own country, because all it has led to is chaos. And I think it's a very difficult time for him to have to defend anything to do with Kamala Harris's record, and they have to make a decision. Is she responsible for the last 4 years or not?
So we've seen, obviously, Joe Biden step down and say he's not going to run for re-election. And then, as predicted on this program, Kamala Harris's popularity via the mainstream media has skyrocketed. We know Donald Trump is Donald Trump. You love him or you hate him, he is bigger than life. My question goes to these VP candidates. For people like you and me, Elizabeth, I mean, we're political nerds, we're political junkies, so this is a big night for us. We can't wait to watch this debate, and we can't wait to debate our friends about it. But for a normal, everyday Joe and Sally American, I mean, how consequential, how much does the VP candidate actually matter?
So it's interesting because I don't think people realize how little these debates used to matter, especially before we had social media and the internet and everything we have now. Nowadays, these matter more. They also matter more because our country, our culture is so obsessed with politics, right? Donald Trump came onto the scene, and you can no longer turn the television on, no matter what channel you're watching, without hearing his name. I think people are watching for two reasons, right? They're watching because they want to either affirm their own decision and their own votes and feel good about who it is that they're supporting, and because they're curious, right? There is a sliver left of this country, despite what people believe, who doesn't know yet who they're voting on, and they're waiting for maybe these vice presidential nominees to make that decision for them. I think there's been a lot said in the media about J.D. Vance, a lot of negative things said, not a lot said about Tim Walz. I think it's strange because J.D. Vance is such a newcomer on the political scene, right? He's a new senator, and Tim Walz has been around for a very long time. He's not just the governor. He was a congressman before that, right? He's been around for a long time, and yet no one knows a lot about him. No one knows where he stands on a lot of issues, much like Kamala Harris, his running mate. So he has a lot to answer to. He has a lot to answer for. J.D. Vance, I think, is actually at the advantage tonight because he's had such a bad go at the media. The way they've treated him has been so nasty. I think he has nowhere to go but up, right, to surprise people with his confidence, with his knowledge, with his character. Tim Walz is the opposite. He's been made out to be this angel, right, Coach Walz, who's coming in to save the day. He has a lot to live up to. So I think people are going to be very, very curious just to see who these two men are, because right now all we have is a caricature of both of them in the media, and I honestly myself look forward to that direct comparison of the two of them.
You know, you mentioned that little sliver of the country that's undecided, maybe people that don't really get engaged into an election until October, until basically today. So a lot of people like that, it's more of a vibe, for lack of a better term. They don't really get deep into the issues. So the vibe of Tim Walz, as you mentioned, he was a teacher, right? He's the football coach. He's kind of like, they're presenting him as America's dad. You know, you're walking your kids down suburbia and he's working on the car, or he's changing his own oil. He's got a lot of energy. He's very bombastic in the body language. Do you think that America is buying Tim Walz as kind of a everyday American, America's dad?
You know, I do, simply because we don't have anything to kind of show that that's not true. I think the media has kind of done the bidding of the Harris-Walz campaign. I think Kamala Harris coming out for as few interviews as she has, despite being the sitting vice president, I think it's a huge problem, but it's a big representation of the strategy of this campaign. We'll see if that works for her. We'll obviously see if it works for Tim Walz as well. I assumed, honestly, when she picked him, that it was because she was going to avoid the media and he was going to be sent out into the media. For example, the amount of press J.D. Vance has done, I think, might actually be record-setting. He is always out there with friendly networks, unfriendly networks, and it doesn't matter if you like him or hate him, you should probably appreciate the transparency and the effort he's putting in to winning the votes of the American people. Tim Walz has surprised me. He's actually been almost hidden away as much as Kamala Harris. I think it's an interesting strategy. It's obviously not going to work tonight where he has to stand for 90 minutes on that debate stage, but he does have to live up to that Coach Walz character, that America's dad that everyone has portrayed him as, and I think it's a lot to live up to, right? I don't know if a lot of people could do it, so I'm curious to see what happens. I'm curious to see what the strategy is, because these are two men we haven't seen a lot of. A lot of people don't know a lot about either one of them for different reasons, so I'm excited, really. I just hope it's an honest debate. I hope the moderators are honest as can be, and I hope the American people get the answers that they desperately need and really deserve.
And finally, Elizabeth Pipko, and thank you for taking the time to be on the show today. Elizabeth, you're a model. You have a major influence on social media. You're in that entertainment, dare I say, kind of Hollywood glitz and glamour world. And you're a supporter of Donald Trump. You're a supporter of Israel. You're a strong conservative. How have you been received by the powers that be in the entertainment industry?
So So it's an interesting question just because I've gone back and forth between both worlds for such a long time. I was a model back in 2016 when I first worked for Donald Trump's campaign back then at 21 years old, and I had to hide the fact that I was working for him so that I could continue my career. Then people found out, and I had to go full force into politics, and I went back out. I went back to the mainstream world. I went back to school to get my master's. I went back. I was on the cover of Harper's Bazaar. I did a lot that I couldn't believe I was allowed to do in that world. And then I was asked to be the national spokeswoman for the Republican Party. So I knew that I had to give all of that up to take this job. I don't think I'm treated very well. At the same time, I'm smart enough to kind of avoid most of those folks. But I have noticed a lot of people kind of sick of that. I really have. There's a lot of people, even those on the left, who disagree with me completely. I think people are kind of sick of being told who they're allowed to support, who they're allowed to be friends with, who they're allowed to feature in their magazines, right? I think people are sick of what has happened these last 8 or so years since Donald Trump announced that he was running for office, won the presidency, and angered people so much they decided to kind of flip our entire country upside down. I've had a lot of really fascinating conversations with people. I have some really exciting projects that might come out in the next week or two. Stay tuned. But I think people need to realize that it doesn't matter how you vote. It matters why you're voting for whoever you're voting for. And I think if your heart's in the right place, if you're trying to do the best thing for this country, it doesn't matter who you're circling. It matters that your heart was in the right place. So I hope that everyone kind of falls in line with that belief. And I hope people realize that keeping those out who you might disagree with politically is only making your circle and your life and your career a lot worse. So that's where I stand. I've had a lot of people who agree with me, a lot who disagree with me, but I'm definitely seeing the tides turning. I really am.
Elizabeth, this show stands up for one thing and one thing only. From the beginning, freedom of speech. And I'm so blessed to have you on our show today. Elizabeth Pipko, keep speaking your mind. A young, very successful American out there that is not afraid to speak her mind and her values. I wish you the best of luck. I hope you come back on the show very soon, and we'll be following those updates, those things you got coming out. I'm sure they're going to be very exciting.
Thank you so much. Hope to talk soon.
There she is, model, author, brilliant political mind, Elizabeth Pipko on the show. My name is Billy Harfosh, broadcasting from Scottsdale, Arizona, Star Worldwide Network Studios. Please like, comment, and subscribe. We'll be back with more explosive interviews.